Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Pearl Harbor, starring Ben Affleck, Josh Hartnett, Kate Beckinsale, Cuba Gooding Jr., John Voight, and Alec Baldwin, directed by Michael Frickin' Bay. Now, why am I doing this movie? Because I'm going to do Midway, not the original with Charlton Heston, but that remake that came out 2016? I forget what year that was. No, it was 2019. That's what it was. But the point is that I would have done the original Midway plus Tora Tora Tora, but I wanted to stick to these two because they're pretty recent. And another thing, I'll see if I can try and do Tora 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 and Midway the original one day. But for now, let's start with Michael Frickin' Bay's version. Let's get into the movie. The movie opens in Tennessee in the year 1923 with the plane flying by screen as we get a young Rafe McCauley and Denny Walker pretending to fly as they were boys back then. And they accidentally start the plane and briefly flying until Danny's father, played by, briefly I'll say, by William Fichtner, picks up Danny and smacks him around while Rafe tells him to stop beating him or else he'll bust him up and calls him a dirty German, which was rather a dumb opening. While we move on to 1940, where as they're adults, Rafe, played by Ben Affleck, and Danny, played by Josh Hartnett, play a game of chicken with each other as he goes into the office of Doolittle, played by Alec Baldwin, as he sends Rafe off to England to help Winston Churchill win the war against the Germans, while Doolittle tries to not let Rafe go, but he goes anyways as Danny is upset about it. And these characters are terrible in this movie. Absolutely terrible. And Michael Bay, I'm just going to say, is a freaking hack. The American soldiers get their needle shots by their nurses and test their eyesights while they test their eyes, for example. Rafe tests his eyes, and somehow the nurse, Evelyn Johnson, played by Kate Beckinsale, passes him, in my opinion, she should be fired from her job for passing him, for somehow passing him in the first place. As he asks her out to dinner after poking him in the ass, and he eventually passes out and wants to ask Evelyn out on a date. And their chemistry is horrible right off the bat. While their date is super awkward and he catches her heart like a snap of a finger after 4 weeks and 2 days, which was way too quick. Like, that's not very realistic, Michael Frickin' Bay. The nurses meet Rafe as Rafe meets with Barbara, Sandra, and Sandra is played by Jennifer Garner, who they'll eventually work together in Daredevil, the 2003 one, and eventually get married and sadly divorced. I won't bring it up. And Betty, played by Jamie King, whom I didn't know her from this movie, but I knew her afterhand when she was in Bulletproof Monk, sadly. While they meet Rafe and Danny Red, played by Ewan Bremner from Trainspotting, and others, I forgot some of their names as they're pretty forgettable in my opinion. While they get close to the New York harbor near the Queen Mary, and they get next to it, and the romance in this is very flat. And director Michael Frickin' Bay is all about style of making his movies have very little characters and is all about the explosions. And it keeps his mojo going, which I heard in an interview. And this man cannot be any more crazier, in my opinion. As Rafe tells Evelyn he's going to England for the war, while 2 weeks after they meet, they start dating, and he says he leaves her, says he has to leave her, and says he loves her, which is a cringy dialogue in so many levels, and the acting in this is painfully awful. Rafe goes on the train to England and doesn't want Evelyn to see him leave as she'll get depressed, but she goes anyways while Danny says his goodbye to Rafe. And Rafe gets to England while President Roosevelt, played by John Voight, he's in a bad mood, and they're building refrigerators while the bad guys are building bombs. And we move on to Japan. Admiral Yamamoto says Japan has no choice but war, in Japanese, I'll say, as it's inevitable, and start their attack of Pearl Harbor. And why the hell is Michael Frickin' Bay making me talk about politics? As I don't want to talk about politics, as this guy is trying to make an enemy out of foreign countries, and I'm here to talk about a movie, as he's done this crap before when he makes 13 Hours eventually. About the Benghazi, whatever that stupid thing was, that terrible movie. As he's shown his politics, And I'm not going to explain mine, as I'm not a Republican nor Democrat. While Rafe is fine, I'm on like both ends. I don't know how to explain it, but while Rafe is fighting with England against the Germans, and right now I'm just bored with the movie, as this first hour is and a half is boring and has nothing to do with the attack on Pearl Harbor until we get an hour and a half into the movie. But now I'm just freaking bored. Rafe goes into battle with the English against the Germans until he gets shot into the water, and some of Rafe's friends are led to believe he's dead. At this point in Hawaii, we meet a cook named Doris Story Miller, played by Cuba Gooding Jr., boxing and wins while getting stitched up by Evelyn, and talks about getting respect from winning at boxing. And Evelyn gets news from Danny about Rafe's death, and Danny comforts her, and I'm not buying the sadness from the actors, as their performances don't come up believable. While I'm thinking, come on, he's alive. Like, why? Otherwise, why cast Ben Affleck as the main lead when he gets killed off when that's not going to last long? It lasts for at least 30 freaking minutes. Jesus. We move on to July 1941, and we learn from Captain Thurman, played briefly by Dan Aykroyd. Why is he here? Because he's supposed to be a funnier guy than in this movie tells you, wondering what the hell is going on with the Japanese, as Evelyn still mourns over Rafe, while 3 months later, Evelyn and Danny can't handle the news and walk out of a movie theater and have their own romance, which doesn't make it any better as far as my opinion of this movie goes. While Red proposes to Betty's hand in marriage, and they bump into Danny and Evelyn in a diner and brings her a handkerchief and tries to ask her out, but wasn't successful, as she says goodbye to Rafe and visits Danny while training with guns, and that scene was just painful. Painful. Danny takes Evelyn flying in the air and have their own romance, which is a little more realistic than how Evelyn met Rafe in the beginning of the movie, and she wants to take it slow while the Japanese take pictures of the area while they're going to bomb. And while we get scenes of the American government not being prepared for an attack, and some of these scenes can be cut out of the movie as it drags the movie slowly and painfully. They hear a dentist getting a call from Japan about the Navy ships as Rafe shows up back home while Danny hears he's alive, and he confronts Evelyn, showing her he's alive after all this time, and Danny sees it with his own eyes, and Rafe believes it. They're a couple, and says for them to stay away, which is awkwardly acted by Ben Affleck, Josh Hartnett, and Kate Beckinsale, while Rafe wants nothing to do with Danny while acting drunk and Rafe fights Danny, and I didn't care for the action scene between Rafe and Danny. Japan prepares for the tragedy of December 7th, 1941 on Pearl Harbor, which, come on, that was history. While Danny tries to talk with Rafe and makes things right with him and sleep in the car until the attack begins, and the shots are not the best thing, while the editing will sometimes be choppy when the attack begins, leading to believe it's the Air Force training. And I do like the sound in the sequence, as this is when the history we know comes to life. And I'm sorry, Japan, but this is what actually happened in that era. That time of 1941 did happen, but I'm not going to explain it any further than that. People are looking up like, what the hell is going on here, while ships are being blown up as people are getting killed left to right, as the hospital gets super busy for the nurses with a bunch of injured soldiers, while Dory's captain dies and planes get blown up, while the American soldiers fight back, as well as Rafe and Danny try to get into a damn plane, while Dory becomes the first African-American soldier to fire a gun in World War II, as he hits one of the Japanese planes down and cheers, and the hospital puts a crap ton of patients against the wall as they put out more on the beds. And at one point, Earl, played by Tom Sizemore, fires a shotgun at the Japanese planes, while we know that's not going to work, as that was laughable to me. Battleships are sinking as the Japanese try to shoot the car, and Danny has some soldiers while the Japanese miss them, and this fighting is going on for a bit too long, as this sequence takes way too long. Like, this is a 30-minute prolonged action scene, while President Roosevelt learns about it, as he asks how bad is it, and a man says it's still going on, and the nurses are going through hell like soldiers are, and get to Earl and hide for their lives, and the Japanese don't know American soldiers are where Earl is at, and they run to some airplanes until eventually they get some of the planes. And I just don't care at this point, as the sequence is too long, and I'm thinking maybe half of this damn movie could have been in the editing room floor. Rafe and Danny fight in the jet fighters against the Japanese, and a plane goes down in the noisiest way possible, because that's what Michael Bay is known for, possible. As they get up to the skies and get a few Japanese planes down with some on their tails, and play the game of chicken as with them as it crashes and a couple of them down, while Earl shoots one on Rafe's tail, and they get on to the battleships and shoots a few more down, and they get back to the ground. And I'm just done with this sequence at this point because it's taken too long. The nurses use their lipsticks to mark their patients as Evelyn runs outside and sees so many wounded soldiers in critical conditions as Betty is killed, and Sandra doesn't know what to do as it's a travesty. And I did like the score in that sequence as it sounds devastating, but the slow motion crap has got to go. And the attack is over while Japan Admiral Yamamoto is congratulated while American soldiers are seriously badly wounded. And President Roosevelt makes a speech about the tragedy as he decides to go to war with Japan. After the speech, he learns people are trapped in the ships, and it is tragic while he tries to stand up. And the acting in this scene by Jon Voight is pretty bad. Excuse me. The Americans give President Roosevelt an ideal way to bomb the Japanese, like the way they bombed Pearl Harbor, and the funeral of every man who was killed is there, and the soldiers as well as Dory is there, and Evelyn talks with Rafe about how much she loved Rafe, and he wants to know why she left for Danny, as she's pregnant, and didn't learn until when Rafe got home. And next scene comes, and Rafe sits with Danny and tells him he'll see him on board. And Evelyn says she loves Danny to him, which is heartbreaking because she doesn't want Danny to know she's pregnant, and go under Doolittle's commands as they're both getting promoted to captain and get awarded medals. And Rafe burns a letter from Evelyn because he's heartbroken, but the love triangle is unconvincing. I just don't care. Rafe tells Danny don't go on the mission Doolittle assigns them to as we get to March of 1942 and go to war with Doolittle. And Alec Baldwin is wasted in this movie, and they test that each airplane of them are not successful as they're completely heavy and go on the USS Hornet. While they're going to Tokyo and bomb it, and they make America believe it was, while Evelyn asks Major Jackson for help on the Doolittle team to only hear for Rafe and Danny, and they prepare to go to war. And at this point, I'm done with this movie as it's too long. It's 3 hours long of wasted time. The Americans go to Japan by airplanes on the next day, and they take off, and every plane are successful to get the planes off the ship as they fly away. And Evelyn works as a typer to hear what's happening to Rafe and Danny as they blow up Japan like hell, like the way they did to America, and they get fired. And I'm checking how many more minutes of this movie do I have, as I have 23 minutes of movie left, as it drags too long. And Michael Bay doesn't know how to be brief anymore. It's ridiculous. President Roosevelt hears our flyers are coming in blind, and they go into a war zone that is Japan, and they get to the coast and encounter the Japanese as they land rather roughly, as Rafe and Danny and the other American troops get fired, as Danny gets roughly landed, and Danny is wounded while the Japanese soldiers beat up on the American soldiers and almost get captured and killed until Rafe shoots the enemies down, and Danny gets shot for protecting Rafe. As he tells Danny he's going to be a father, but unfortunately Danny slowly dies. He gives Evelyn and their baby to Rafe to protect them. As Evelyn learns from Rafe, Danny is sadly dead in a casket, and Evelyn narrates about how the nurses get into the uniforms, as Dory is awarded medal, and World War II began at Pearl Harbor for America, which makes sense. And we see the kid named Danny Jr. is going to grow up as Rafe shows him how to fly, and the climax is exhausting. And at the end of the day, Michael frickin' Bay can't make a good movie anymore. But how bad was this movie? Let's get to the rating, shall we? I'll give this movie a 2.9 out of 10. The characters are terrible in this movie. Absolutely terrible. While the acting in this is pretty awful, and painfully too, while the dialogue was poorly acted, the dialogue is very cringy, and the romance was so bad in this movie as it doesn't feel realistic. And this movie had nothing to do with the attack of Pearl Harbor except for an hour and a half into the movie, as this movie is too damn long at 3 hours, as an hour into this movie could have been cut out. This can be sometimes boring as hell, like killing off Ben Affleck the first 45 minutes, but coming back alive after a half an hour later. And when we get to the attack, the action sequences gave me the biggest headache in movie history, as that's any Michael frickin' Bay movie in general, as he's trying to make stereotypes of people in different countries, as bad as he's a terrible director for this movie, in my opinion, or in general after this in Transformers. I never want to see another movie from this guy again. Like, I never saw Ambulance, and thank God for that, because after 13 hours, I was done with this guy. The shots are not the best thing about the movie, as the editing is choppy, like Michael frickin' Bay goes 1, 2, 3, switch numerous times, and at this point, this movie was hurting my eyes. Despite I like the sound in the movie, and I like that one piece of score at the end of the attack, as it was fine, but at the end of the day, this is a solid non-recommendation for this movie, as the romance was flat, and this was just a bad movie, period. And I never want to watch this movie ever again, or any Michael Bay movie ever again, as this is insulting to the people who fought in this war back in 1941 when World War II began in our history. So I would like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time I will be back with Midway. And until then, please God, make Midway better than this pile of crap.